Aloha! Coming from our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., I want to welcome you to my first episode of Conversations with Kai, where every month we will feature national elected leaders and subject matter experts on a particular issue important to Hawaii and our nation. Today, we are going to discuss a very important subject, broadband. Almost 30 years ago, on August 6th, 1991, when I was a junior in high school, the World Wide Web, otherwise known as the Internet, became available to the public and would fundamentally change every aspect of the world as we knew it. Since then, many have been working on advancing broadband services throughout our country, making it as affordable and accessible to every American. Although we have made great strides, we have a long way to go. I am humbled to have joining me in this episode my colleague, the Honorable Congressman from South Carolina, James E. Clyburn, the Majority Whip and the third-ranking Democrat in the United States House of Representatives, and who currently serves as the chairman of the House Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Crisis. He is also the chairman of the Rural Broadband Task Force and Democratic Faith Working Group. When he came to Congress in 1993 to represent South Carolina's 6th Congressional District, Whip Clyburn was elected co-president of his freshman class and quickly rose through leadership ranks. He was subsequently elected chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, vice chairman, and later chairman of the House Democratic Caucus. He previously served as Majority Whip from 2007 to 2011 and served as Assistant Democratic Leader from 2011 to 2019. Whip Clyburn founded the House Rural Broadband Task Force in 2019, and today there are 27 Democrats on that task force, of which I am privileged to be a part of, working to close the digital divide. In the last Congress, the House Rural Broadband Task Force introduced House Resolution 7302, the Accessible, Affordable Internet for All Act, which passed the House of Representatives last summer as a part of House Resolution 2, the Moving Forward Act. Now, certain proposals included in the task force's bill were incorporated into the enacted Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, which was signed into law in December. The enacted provisions included the establishment of a new emergency broadband benefit, which will provide a $50 monthly discount to help millions of students, families, and unemployed workers afford the internet service they need during the pandemic. In the current 117th Congress, the House Rural Broadband Task Force will continue to pursue legislative initiatives, including the reintroduction of the Accessible, Affordable Internet for All Act, as well as by engaging in meaningful partnerships with communities and stakeholders. So I'd like to welcome Rep. Clyburn for joining me this morning. Aloha.
Thank you very much for having me. Aloha. It's always a pleasure to talk about our efforts to make broadband accessible and affordable for all. As you know, South Carolina, the state that I represent, is pretty rural in many areas, not unlike a lot of your congressional district and the state of Hawaii. And so several years ago, when I looked around and saw that so many of the school children in my congressional district were having tremendous difficulty doing homework. And it came forcibly to my attention that a lot of that, in fact, most of it, had to do with affordability. And so I set out to really tackle it. And it came forcefully home to me when I was chatting with my granddaughter, who is now in medical school, but when she was in high school, I was talking to her one day, and it was early in the afternoon. And I said, Sydney, have you done your homework for the day? And she says, no, I have not received it yet. Well, it was after school. I said, what do you mean you have not received it? She said, well, we get it via the internet. It'll come in around 4:30 or 5 o'clock, and I'll go to study. And I said to myself, she is getting her homework assignments via the internet. And I just talked to a school superintendent in a part of my district who was lamenting that only 30% of her students were in homes that were connected. I said, wow. This is a big problem. Why would my granddaughter be getting her homework assignment via the internet? And I've got so many students in my district that are not connected at all. And then one day, I'm sitting here working on disaster relief. And a group of farmers from all over the country came to Washington to talk to me about the bill we were putting together to help them with disaster relief because their farms had been flooded out for a second year in a row. And the chair was from Minnesota. But as we went around the room with all states talking about their problems, we came to this one guy who was sitting directly across from me. And he said to me, he said, you know, I came here to talk to you about my farm, but that's not what's on my heart. He said, what's on my heart today are those families in my county that go off to work in the mornings, send their kids to school, they come home in the afternoons, and they load their kids up in their automobiles, and they go down to the parking lot of the local library, and they sit out in their automobiles to do their homework because their homes are not connected to the internet. And that night, I was talking to several of my colleagues here that I hang out with in the evenings, and I told them about this experience. And one of them, Sanford Bishop from Georgia, he says, man, that's prevalent. In my district, when my high school students finish football practice, they get on buses and go down to the local fast food joint, and there they sit on the buses to do their homework. That's when I said, this is it. And I pulled a group together that says, we got to do something about this. And that resulted in the Rural Broadband Task Force. And last Congress, we got a $100 billion bill passed as a part of the Moving Forward Act to really do something about it. And we had some successes. We have not done the whole $100 billion. So we're coming back this time. With your help, we are going to get the rest of that money in whatever we call this big infrastructure bill that we are going to do when the president decides it'll be time to introduce it.
Well, you know, the very first time we met in your office, you asked me if I would join the Rural Broadband Task Force. And at the time, I wasn't sure, you know, what that meant or what the task force's core mission was. But through some of the initial meetings we've had, you know, I'm really excited to bring, like you said, bringing different members of Congress together with unique perspectives coming from all over the country to try and address that digital divide, all the way down to the child sitting in the library parking lot, you know, in their parents' car or in the bus, trying to figure out how they can get online, or sitting outside of McDonald's, or having to go to a McDonald's. To just sit at the table there and get online and do their homework. So what would be some things that, besides the additional funding mechanism that we need to work on this year, some other long-range goals that you think both South Carolina and Hawaii could benefit from as we you know, continue to invest in infrastructure and get more people online?
Well, you know, when we were responding to the disaster relief, that to me was very, very necessary. And then all of a sudden, right around a year ago now, we got visited with COVID-19. And all of a sudden, all of these things that we thought were very, very important, it was just exasperating. Here we are, needing to do the testing and the contact tracing and the isolating and the treatment. And how do you do that in rural communities? I mean, how do you do it effectively? And then Nancy Pelosi came to me. She has always known that I'm a big fan of Harry Truman. And she started talking to me one day about Harry Truman's work with this commission that was set up back during World War II to study the country's response to the war and how we could keep from making the mistakes that we made after World War I. Right. And I was very familiar with that. And I started telling Nancy all the things I thought we could do. And 2 days later, she came back. She said, I'm going to put together this task force, and I want you to chair it. And I'm going to pattern this task force after the old Truman Commission that was set up back in 1941 to respond to World War II. Now, here's the interesting thing, is that World War I came to a close, really, some people said 1917, but I think effectively it came to a close in 1918. Something else happened in 1918. We had the Spanish flu, and that was a terrible situation. So we had then this double whammy. And here we are, another double whammy 100 years later. And so to me, that made broadband even more necessary.
Important.
This is what we got to do to respond to healthcare. How can we have telehealth?
Right.
Got to have broadband. Online learning. Our kids are out of school.
My kids are out of school.
Yes. Now, your kids are probably like my grandkids.
Yeah.
They're going to be able to keep up.
Right.
Because they got the internet in their homes. That's not true for many of their classmates. And they're going to fall behind. And if you do that for a second year, as it looks like we may do in some areas, what's going to happen to the 8th and 9th grader after missing 2 years of school? So broadband is very important because the experts are telling us this is not the last healthcare crisis that we're going to have. And the impact that it could have going forward is so important. We got to get this done. And we got to do it in this next infrastructure bill. What I've been saying to people that are listening, look, when you start talking about all of this infrastructure stuff, we always think about highways, roads, and bridges. What do we call it? I noticed you said at your introduction. At the time we started talking about the internet, we called it the information highway. We got to treat the information highway the same way we treat the interstate highway. It's an infrastructure problem.
Couldn't agree more. You know, in Hawaii, one of the challenges we deal with is infrastructure. And as I explained earlier, you know, Hawaii gets its broadband connectivity from trans-Pacific cables that go from continent to continent and come to Hawaii. Many of them have been installed years and years ago and are aging and need to be replaced. And then within the Hawaiian Islands, the main islands, you have undersea cables that connect those islands. And so when we're talking infrastructure, one of the priorities for Hawaii is to start replacing these aging undersea cables, make sure that they're you know, using fiber optics and as best infrastructure possible. Back in Hawaii, the Hawaii Broadband Strategic Plan, through a Broadband Hui task force, and Governor Ige published a strategic plan that outlined 4 goals for the state of Hawaii, and it was published in November of 2020. Part of it because of what happened in March and April of last year with the coronavirus. Now, what the Broadband Hui has been doing is to help spread the word about funding opportunities for rural broadband and community network projects, and they've identified 4 overarching goals for the Broadband Hui. Goal number 1, is to ensure robust broadband infrastructure to all Hawaii residents. Number 2 is to expand digital inclusion and adoption to achieve digital equity. Number 3 is to enable Hawaii to thrive through a digital economy. And finally, number 4 is to strengthen community resiliency through broadband. Whip Clyburn, what are some of maybe some best practices at the federal, state, or local level, and those coordination efforts so we can all work together, how
Sure.
Hawaii and South Carolina can work together to achieve our broadband efforts and some of the goals that you've outlined?
Well, thank you for raising that issue. What we've got to do, it seems to me, is look at the entire structure and see what we can do about getting all hands on deck. Now, NASU has worked on a piece of legislation. Now, what we've done with this broadband task force, so that your constituents will know that we aren't willy-nilly here. We are working together. NASU has been working to make it possible for this legislation to go forward by allowing state and local governments to get in on the act as well. Because what we've had in the past, and this is a problem of affordability, the profit motive is so great when it comes, and it should be. You know, I'm one of those people who believe there's a mistake to treat government like a business. Businesses exist to make a profit, and that's what keeps businesses going. My mom's was a tremendous businesswoman, but she couldn't maintain a business unless she were to make the profit. Government should exist to provide service, not to make a profit. One of the reasons we've got so much student debt today is because the profit motive creeped in to student loans. So that's the way it ought to be for broadband. And a lot of communities did not get access to broadband simply because their localities, their municipalities and their counties have been barred from getting in on the act. So in our bill, NASU is saying, we got to do better than this. We got to allow these small businesses to get involved, just as they get involved in other infrastructure projects, water systems. In many instances, locally run by municipalities with governments. I know I pay the city of Columbia, where I live, for my water bill.
Sure.
So the same thing we should apply to broadband as well. Grace Maine has been working on putting hot spots in these communities. And there are other parts of the broadband experience that we've got to get out there. Now, the biggie is this. Every time you turn on your television, you see advertisements for 5G. Who gets the 5G? Very seldom, if ever, do you hear any focus on people who's got no Gs at all.
Right.
My daughter, a former FCC commissioner, likes to talk about no G versus 5G.
Wow.
And so she's got me kind of calibrated on that. So my focus, though I want to see us get as fast of an internet service as we possibly can, I want it to be affordable.
Right.
And the only way you're going to do that, it seems to me, is for us as the government to get involved and make it affordable. Yep. And that's why another part of our bill is to have subsidies for low-income families, households, so we can make the internet affordable as well.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because that was my next question. You know, when we talk about 5G versus no G, we talk about making it affordable. You know, we know that just today, millions of people are still not connected to the internet in this country. And that the majority of those people come from economically challenged communities,
Sure.
geographically isolated communities. It's often the poor and the low income. What does expanding the internet access for them mean to lift them out of the hardships that they're in and give them those same economic opportunities and economic prosperities that other communities can enjoy. And I think about back home, the Native Hawaiian community, that majority live in geographically isolated areas throughout Hawaii. They're on the lower rung of the economic ladder. And I think about what providing high-speed broadband to them could mean for them and their families and their future generations.
Well, I mean, everything when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to education. Education to me is about providing experiences beyond the textbook. And it's one thing when you talk about homework, but it's something else again when you start about connectivity to the rest of the world, to the world around you. It's everything about building the kind of sophistication that one needs in order to navigate. People used to, when I was growing up, there's a big difference in book learning and life's experiences. And so when we provide the learning opportunities, we have also got to have the experiences there. And the internet gets us not just through the books, but beyond the books as well. And so I think it's very, very important for our children to be connected, not just throughout the state, which will be a real challenge in some parts of South Carolina as well as Hawaii, but also to the rest of the world. Because the world is becoming one big community. And so we have got to keep that in mind when we start talking about preparing our children for the future, a future that's going to be very, very complicated without the internet.
Absolutely. Let's talk about existing federal programs. And I wanted to take a few minutes to go over existing programs that fund broadband and connectivity. For example, the Federal Communication Commission's Universal Service Fund. These are funds that invest in infrastructure projects, including in Hawaii on the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. The FCC USF funds has its origination back to the Telecommunications Act of 1996. And of course, there's other funds out there like the Connect America Fund, Lifeline, which helps low-income consumers, consumers on tribal lands. There's the schools and libraries and rural health care. What would you like to expand on those federal funding mechanisms?
All of those things were involved in what we were doing. This $100 billion bill that I talked about, accessible, affordable broadband for all, that is very comprehensive. Now, as I said, we had some piecemeal success in certain aspects of it. So we're going, this new bill that we introduced, we're probably, will definitely not be a $100 billion bill. Now, when people look at the headlines, they'll say, well, that's not what you promised. It's a little bit like we discussed back in December, direct payments of $2,000 in the households, and now we're talking about $1,400. And I've seen these headlines saying, you're going back on your word. Well, we did $600 back then, so we put in the $1,400 to bring it to $2,000. And that's what we're going to be faced with in this bill, because we went out $100 billion. The Senate was talking about $100 billion. I think that the real number on what we put out was like 87 billion. Now we're going to be coming with less than that, down in the sixes, because we've already done some of it, and we won't have to redo that. And so those programs you mentioned, we're saying to people, yeah, come into the business, but you got to have at least one plan that's affordable. Now, it's one thing for me to want all the bells and whistles. It's like almost anything else to do. We got to have at least one plan that's affordable. And we got to look at our federal laws as well. And I'll tell you one that's particularly insulting to me, and that is our decision to say as you go through census tracts, if one household in a census tract is covered, the entire census tract is covered. That is the law that we've got to get rid of. We've got to look at the realities of things. And it may not be so in Hawaii like it is in South Carolina, but when I was growing up, these big plantations had a big house and a lot of...
we had plantations too in Hawaii. There was sugar and pineapple. You know?
That's exactly right. I know.
South Carolina was probably...
We were cotton and tobacco.
That's
yeah, yours was a little healthier, I guess, than ours was. It's so you got the big house there. The internet's at the big house.
Yeah.
But all these other houses around, no internet. But according to the FCC, that entire census tract is considered as being covered.
Well, we need to change that.
You got to change that. And we got to have the mapping done in such a way that it counts households and not census tracts. Right. And we've got to do the mapping. Now, fortunately for us in South Carolina, way back, when former Senator Fritz Hollins, the late Senator Fritz Hollins now, was governor of South Carolina, he pioneered in educational television, for instance. And so we had all these towers all around for ETV. And we made the decision that we are going to do our mapping, take these towers into account so we've got the best mapping in South Carolina that you can believe. But we got to fund it. Yeah. You know, also, we've now allowed in South Carolina co-ops, these rural electric co-ops. We've now authorized them to use all of the right-of-way that they were granted for electricity, to use that right-of-way for the internet. So these kinds of things we've got to do if we're going to make it available for everybody. And it's kind of easy to do. It's just that people get caught up in their own little ways, and sometimes they don't make a lot of sense.
Well, I'm excited about the major investment that the Congress is going to do in broadband infrastructure. You know, just as an example, it's estimated to cost a couple $100 million, maybe a little under $300 million, to run a new high-speed fiber optic trans-Pacific cable from the continental United States to Hawaii, where we can start to replace one of our aging undersea cables. That's how much it costs. So when we're looking at a $85 billion bill or an investment throughout our country, I hope that there's some things that we can do, for Hawaii and of course for South Carolina and for states that desperately need that investment.
I think it's going to be incumbent upon you and others to bring these things to the attention of the entire Congress, because the cost of not doing it is too great for us to be quivering on how much it costs to do it. And so I say to people all the time, and they're telling me, well, that costs so much. Well, let's do some calculating on what it would cost.
What it would really cost,
if we don't do it. And so I think that's what we're going to have to do going forward. We're getting a little better at it. I think that the public is now seeing, especially after COVID-19, that there's some significant costs in not doing, especially infrastructure stuff, in order to prepare for the future. Because we're going to have a future. Now the question is, how will we deal with it?
And that's a great way to end our segment. And I'm looking forward to working on that future with you, Whip Clyburn.
Look forward to it.
Mahalo for taking the time to talk about the House Rural Broadband Task Force and the federal programs and resources that are designed to help our rural communities build broadband infrastructure and achieve connectivity. If you are interested in following our offices for legislative updates, please subscribe to our e-newsletters on kahele.house.gov and majoritywhip.gov. You can also follow us on social media, and I hope you'll continue to tune in for future episodes of Conversations with Kai. Again, Majority Whip Clyburn, Mahalo nui loa, behalf of the people of Hawaii, thank you so much. I look forward to working with you.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
All right. Take care.